Here on the ground, change happens fast. Problems feel frequent and urgent. It's loud and anxiety runs high. From a satellite view, the Earth looks the same as it did thousands of years ago. We've been here before. Let's learn from our past and shoot for a better future.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of A Satellite View. I'm Todd Mikkelson, your host, speaking at you from Monday, June 15th, 2026 in the space and time continuum. As we know, yesterday was Donald Trump's 80th birthday, and he needed a new place for a nap. I'm getting sick of taking naps on camera in the Oval Office. I was like... Need a new place for a nap. Many say they love to watch me sleep. So he built a stadium on the south lawn of the White House and had a UFC cage match, I think they call it. I loathe the UFC and everything it stands for. And of course, Donald Trump then showed up there and took a nap. I think it might have got delayed because of Mother Nature also hating what's going on and presenting dangerous thunderstorms. There was some magnificent photos of lightning strikes. One of them was an incredible photo of a strike with the Washington Monument in the foreground and a rainbow in the background. That was Washington, D.C. on Donald Trump's birthday. And I think that is a big sign of the universe speaking out, saying, no, motherfucker, this is ours. This city is ours. But the fights went on. Apparently, and I see pictures of these guys, and then I hear them talk. One guy apparently yelled into a microphone that... I don't even want to say it, but apparently yelled into a microphone, Michelle Obama is a man. So that's where these idiots are coming from. You would normally call them apes, except that's an insult to apes. You would normally call them animals, except that's an insult to animals. And I'm not just talking about the guys doing the disgusting, gross fighting, because animals would never do that to each other. Yes, animals fight, but it's because of survival or something like that. It's not for fun or because you need to reinforce your own masculinity to yourself because you don't really have enough. So you need to make up for it by acting like, I was going to again say an ape, but apes are much smarter than you if you're one of these guys. And by the way, I'm not just talking about the guys doing the fighting. Like I said, I'm talking about every person in that audience. If you're a UFC fan, there's something wrong with you. Period. My kid, Eve, loves to watch wrestling sometimes, but that's because of the pageantry. I asked her about it just today. So you like these wrestling matches? Yes. Okay. But that's because of the pageantry, because it's basically the same thing as going to a drag show. And the answer from Eve was, yes, it is exactly like watching a drag show. That's what happens in professional wrestling with all the costumes and trying to be characters and things like that. It is like watching a drag show. They don't kick each other in the face and draw blood. They don't actually injure each other. They don't actually try and physically harm each other the way these UFC fights are. This is just absolutely gross and disgusting. Again, talk about other civilizations, say Native American tribes fighting against each other. It was for some sort of reason, like I know the Lakota kept getting pushed into other people's territories, out of their current territories by the white man, And then they started to kind of try and move into other territories, and they would pick fights with the tribes that were already there. That was some of the fighting that was going on in the United States area before it was even the United States with Native Americans. They didn't just fight each other because they thought it was funny. They didn't fight each other because they were lacking their masculinity enough that they had to think of atrocious ways of having to make up for it. Okay, that's my rant on the UFC. The fact that Donald Trump has made the White House into the white trash house. I'm sure, I hope somebody, I know somebody's going to tear that monstrosity down. It might be the universe, whatever you want to call it. It might be God, Mother Nature. But somebody's going to tear it down. And I'm sure then Donald Trump will just, let's get a couple old cars out there, take the wheels off, put them on cinder blocks, and just let them sit there, just to bug the libs. We gotta find out better ways of. All right, enough of the UFC rant. Let's go to the happy part of Donald Trump ruining things and point out that hundreds of thousands of Americans, or probably people around the world as well, maybe even more, but hundreds of thousands of Americans were watching streaming live for hours on end, a tarp draped in front of the Kennedy Center. That's how much people wanted to see Donald Trump's erasure from that building. And the fact that he put up a tarp so that nobody could actually watch the letters be ripped off the building just makes him into even more of a piece of shit who is such a little, again, I'll call him a little baby, child. That's an insult to little babies and children. Little boy, that's an insult to little. Anyway, the thin skin, and of course that's an insult to people with thin skin. But I guess that's apropos, right? I don't know, losing track here. But the fact that he didn't want anyone to see the letters actually be ripped off just makes him even worse and makes him look like even more of a narcissistic idiot in front of these hundreds of thousands of people who watched for hours, even though they knew they weren't going to see the letters ripped off, but they knew what was going on behind the tarp. That was enough for them to keep track of it. They wanted to catch any moment they could. There were people watching, streaming on certain places, and they would see that there was, like 85,000 people on that streaming. And then there's other streaming. Other people were reporting, there's 50,000 people on this streaming platform. There's 100,000 on this one. There were hundreds of thousands of people watching a tarp. When those letters were put up, they had these, they used to call them cherry pickers. A platform that you could quickly raise a person in. And, I guess they used to use them for picking cherries, probably. But anyway, the letters were put up within, 2 hours because they used these cherry pickers. When they were torn down under court order, Donald Trump ordered that it took like 2 days to build scaffolding, and then they put up this tarp. That took days, and then they tore the letters down. So a waste of time, a waste of taxpayer money, just because he couldn't handle people celebrating his name being torn down. And now we're watching eBay to see if any of those guys, any of those workers might be trying to sell any of the letters. How much would the J go for? How much would the T go for? So that's the happy thing. And again, this is the people, the power of the people, who, by the way, are still protesting in Albania. The power of the people brought down the dictatorship of Turkey this year, a few months ago. And we are in the process of doing that here in the U.S. The midterms are going to be an absolute bloodbath for the Republicans. They know it. That's why they're doing everything they can. And what's happening now with Donald Trump doing all the crap he's doing, I think the pressure is going to build even more. The Epstein file, what was released this week about what's going on with the Epstein files, is a huge deal. It's a huge deal. Everything is at a fever pitch, ready to burst right now. And the administration knows it. And they're trying to get everything they can before these midterm elections. They're trying to set up ways of thwarting the midterm elections, but they've been doing it too transparently and for too long. I predict it's not going to work. I predict these elections, they're not going to be able to do the same thing they did in 2024 with Elon Musk using his satellites and all that kind of stuff, because this isn't one presidential election where everything's focused on the one election and then things roll down from there. This is just hundreds and hundreds and thousands of individual elections across the country without the focus of a singular presidential election. I think these are going to be fair elections. I think it's going to work out. By the way, there was a YouGov poll taken in 2025 that shows that 40% of Americans believe Kamala Harris won. That actually, I think that's 40% of Democrats. I should correct myself. In the state of Maine, it's about 47% of Democrats believe that the 2024 election was rigged and that Kamala Harris won. It might be because they saw a lot of evidence of it, like I have seen and I have presented here for you. That was weeks and months ago. And, you know, I always tell you, don't trust me either. Go inside yourself. You remember the Kamala Harris campaign. You remember the Donald Trump campaign. Did he win more handily than any president has ever won, winning all 7 swing states by just enough of a margin that there were not recounts called? Just above the margin where a recount needs to be called. Right? Okay. We've gone through that in the past. I'm not gonna redo that here, because I do want to talk. Although this is just a feces, fire hose of feces fire hose. That's what we call it, right? The feces fire hose of crap going on that drives us crazy. I want to point out some positive things and how I think might be a good way to handle the time, the 4.5 months from now to the midterm elections. We were all hoping that the UFC fights wouldn't happen. We were all hoping let's just face it. We were all hoping Donald Trump would be dead by now. Melania Trump being at the top of the list of people who hoped that. Of course, I think she was hoping for that 15 years ago. But anyway, he's still here. This crap is still happening. Things are moving too slow. But this Epstein thing is a big deal. I want to talk about that. The Iran thing is a big deal. We want to talk about that. But remember, how many people sat and watched a TARP on streaming for hours? Because that's how much people want to see the erasure of Donald Trump. We're all ready. Many interviews out this week. There were a lot of interviews from Trump supporters who voted for him 3 times in Ohio, who are absolutely against him now. He's lost everybody. 16%, 16% of Americans thought this UFC thing was a good idea. That's because only 16% of Americans are that barbaric and think this barbarism is a good idea. By the way, that's a reflection of the Donald Trump administration. Barbarism. Barbarism occurred on the South Lawn of the White House because this administration wants that for America. but only 16% of Americans want that for America. We're going to come back and I'm going to explain some things that I think are positive, and we're going to go through some things to keep in mind for the next 4.5 months between now and the midterm elections. You're listening to A Satellite View. We will be right back from a short break. And we're back on the Satellite View. Find our website, satelliteviewpodcast.com. Go to YouTube and do a search for Satellite View Podcast. You'll find our channel, and then subscribe. It's free. And also, you can find me at Todd Mikkelson on Instagram. What's it called? Twitter? Is it called Twitter? No, it's called X now. Doesn't matter. Doing a couple things here at the same time. I want to read you some things about the Iran deal. This is from my Blue Sky account. Mrs. Betty Bowers writes, and I agree, Donald Trump is so breathtakingly incompetent, he spent billions to blow the bits out of Iran up, then agreed to give them $300 billion to put it back together, and the only thing he accomplished was getting domestic gas prices to skyrocket. And then another funny thing. There's a reason public pools and fountains are not painted dark colors like American flag blue, because they absorb and retain far more heat than light grays or whites, turning the water into a literal breeding ground for algae. So Donald Trump, trying to redo the Lincoln reflecting pool, has ruined it even more. It's got more algae now than it did before because he painted it dark blue. Because he's an idiot. Midas Touch says about the Iran deal, in other words, the U.S. gives Iran everything it wants immediately, including billions in cash, for a pinky promise to negotiate a future deal on the things the U.S. wants. And Donald Trump is in a meeting with Macron saying, Barack Hussein Obama was the worst thing ever. Sir, you're sleeping. Wake up. He gave them $1.7 billion of their own money, and we're not doing that. No, you're giving them $300 billion. Anyway, it's all maddening. It's quite maddening, and I don't know if you saw, then Donald Trump goes to France for the G7 and falls asleep as Macron, he looked so sickly. Macron begins talking. Donald Trump speaks, and then Macron begins talking, and right away, I'm not talking 30 seconds in, I'm talking 2 seconds in, Donald Trump is starting to nod off. His eyes, it's like he's blinking, but when they go closed, they stay closed, and he leans a little to his right, and then they come open again, and then he closes it, and he's nodding off. It's just, he looks horrible. He says the most idiotic crap. Anyway, so the algae pool is just, it's sad, but it's funny, right? I want to talk a little bit about, there was some very bad news going on, and this has to change. We need to have a Theodore Roosevelt kind of redo of our antitrust systems, because Donald Trump's DOJ antitrust approved of this merger with one of Donald Trump's billionaire friends, and now he's also taken over CNN and HBO, and he's going to own such a huge portion of where people get their news that we have to go to alternative news sources like I have talked about here a lot. But I want to talk about, there are some interesting things about the FCC. I left the house today to go for a walk in a park, and in the car, I heard a couple good things on MSNBC. First of all, they're giving Alicia Menendez her own show now every day, which is great because she's, I think, one of the best people on MSNBC. And there was a woman on there talking about the 39% doctrine, which I thought was really interesting. This is the FCC rules from years ago. It was very interesting to me because I'm rewatching The West Wing again, of course. It is a really good show. And just last week, I saw the episode that was from the 5th season where C.J. Craig, the communications director, the press secretary, is frustrated because she can't get reporters to report on the fact that the FCC is trying to change the rules so that a single owner can own up to 39% stations that reach 39% of viewers in the United States. That's what was going on in 2003. So that particular thing started because in 1956, they set a limit of 35%. No single owner could own stations that covered more than 35% of listeners or viewers on radio or TV. And then it started to get changed. Of course, started to make a lot of changes under Reagan. He got rid of the fairness doctrine and things like that. I was going to Brown Institute for Broadcasting in the 1980s, and what I remember is we learned that there was a cap. You could not own more than 7 AM stations, more than 7 FM stations, or more than 5 TV stations. In 2002, September 2002, the FCC issued a notice of proposing rulemaking stating the commission would reevaluate its media. Now, they're supposed to be here for the good of the public interest. That's what the FCC is supposed to be doing. But in June 2003, so this is right, kind of toward the beginning of the George W. Bush administration, the Republicans taking over, trying to take over media completely. They began in the late 80s, and Rush Limbaugh was born into our knowledge. But in June 2003, after its deliberations, which included a single public hearing and the review of nearly 2 million pieces of correspondence from the public opposing further relaxation of the ownership rules, the FCC voted 3-2 to repeal, so a lot of these rules that we're talking about. They've stopped listening to the American public, and they started to get politicized. In June 2003, the Republican-dominated FCC voted along party lines to ease a number of media ownership regulations, including one that would allow television networks to purchase more stations, extending their national reach from 35% to 45%. That's right at the time. This is from an article written in November of 2003 on PBS News. This is right about the time when that West Wing episode aired. So that debacle was going on. That's 23 years ago almost. And that was 20 years after it began. So this needs to get changed back. The antitrust, no, it's not antitrust. These decisions that have been made for David Ellison, to take over even more ownership after taking over CBS and ruining it. It needs to change. Somebody needs to change it back. The way Theodore Roosevelt fought against all of the oligarchs and the robber barons back at the turn of the 20th century, we need to do that again. Now, I'm going to shift here. I'm done talking about the bad things. One thing that I noticed is that the Democratic Party is up in arms over people like Graham Plattner and Zoran Mamdani. Remember how scared the Democrats were of Zoran Mamdani becoming the candidate for mayor of New York City? I want to point out some things here. I'm going to read you this bulletin just in. $50 seats and free round-trip bus to World Cup games available exclusively for New York City residents. Announcement made in Harlem's Little Senegal, the heart of New York's West African soccer community. New York Mayor Zoran Mamdani today announced that the city of New York, in partnership with the NYNJ Host Committee, has secured 1,000 affordable tickets to the FIFA World Cup 2026 for New Yorkers at $50 per seat, including free round-trip bus transportation to MetLife Stadium, where the games are being held. The mayor made the announcement in Little Senegal, surrounded by Harlem residents, African community leaders, and elected officials wearing jerseys representing tournament nations with deep roots in New York City. The terrorism that the Trump administration tried to perpetrate on the world about coming to the United States for the World Cup games. Again, I'm not a fan of World Cup. I know nothing about it. But there's so much footage of people coming to the United States and enjoying other people. And Mayor Zoran Mamdani realizes the tickets are unaffordable for regular people. He's trying to do all he can. By the way, he put together watch parties after the whole Trump debacle for the basketball games that were going on in New York City. He put together multiple watch parties where thousands of people showed up so that regular New Yorkers could enjoy the game that they deserve to watch. This is Zoran Mamdani just being a guy. And that's what the Democratic Party needs to stop being afraid of. That's what they're afraid of. They're afraid of Zoran Mamdani. They're afraid of Graham Plattner. They were afraid at one point of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They were afraid of James Tallarico. These people are just being people. They were afraid of Pete Buttigieg just because he was gay. Pete Buttigieg is a great messenger. We've seen him go on Fox News and flummox the hosts because he just talks like a guy. Now, this is something that the Republicans used to get credit for. Everyone wanted to have a beer with George W. Bush because he was a fucking idiot. And the idiots of America were like, I like him. I understand him. Because he talked like a regular guy? No, he didn't talk like a regular guy because I didn't understand him. I didn't understand how we could have elected such a knob to be in such a high place. Donald Trump? Is he a regular guy? But people thought, oh no, he's just talking to us, the regular people. Now all those regular people are pissed at him because he's basically become a king saying, let him eat cake while he's falling asleep at his own UFC, multi-billion-dollar event with putting billions of dollars in his friends' pockets, while all these people who voted for him because they thought he was plain spoken for them and was sticking up for them, now they realize he never gave a flying fuck about them. Now, Zoran Mamdani, does he give a fuck about his constituents? It looks like he does. And he makes sense when he talks. Graham Plattner, he got more votes than any Maine candidate in a primary ever in Maine history. He blew it out of the water. And even the people in Maine, we talked about this over the last couple of weeks, even if they're like, well, I know that some of these stories about his past, but that makes him a regular guy. And what he is saying really makes sense to me right now. Graham Plattner is a great messenger. You know why? Because he's just being a guy. He's making sense. Not to the dumb people who vote for Trump. I'm sorry if you're listening and you voted for Trump and you think I'm calling you dumb. You were dumb when you voted for Trump. Hopefully you're no longer dumb. But that was pretty fucking stupid of you. And I'm not going to pull that punch. You're welcome here with us if you've seen the light, if you found your way. Graham Plattner is asking for redemption. Wow, what religion does that? You're supposed to ask Jesus for redemption. The church I was forced to go to as a child was called Redeemer Lutheran Church. Jesus is the Redeemer. Graham Plattner is asking for redemption. He went through hard times. Now he's a different guy. And he wants to work for the people of Maine in Congress. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, she works for her constituents. And she makes sense. She said, we talked about this last week, when we get the government back, I want to use the federal government to create affordable health care, to create affordable education, to create affordable groceries at this point. That makes sense to me. James Tallarico says, if you're a young person right now, you're disillusioned. And that, when you actually analyze being disillusioned, that means you're no longer illusioned. Now you see the light. That's what, quote unquote, being woke is all about. We woke up from the slumber. They can't put the wool over our eyes anymore because our eyes are wide open and we won't allow it to be put there. That's why they're so scared of woke, because woke makes them powerless. They want us to stay asleep. And now our new wave of candidates, including Mamdani, who's no longer a candidate, he won his election handily, and he's doing a kick-ass job, and New Yorkers love him. Graham Plattner is in the process of being a candidate, winning. So is James Tallarico. AOC is a candidate again, but she's going to handily win because everyone loves her. Her constituents love her because she has not let them down. These people speak sense. That's what we need to do. Stop listening to people who studied political science, who then became a consultant of messaging, and just go inside yourself and be a human and say what you see and what you think. That's what we want. That's what everybody wants. And that's what's happening now with these younger new candidates. When I ran 15 years ago, more than 15 years ago, or about 15 years ago, when I ran, I was so careful because it was I can't say what I really think about certain things or it'll hurt my chances. Then I ran a second time and I was like, no, that's not right. I learned that people want me to say what I really think. They want honesty. They don't want you to look like you're being careful on what you're saying when you're answering a question of theirs. They want to hear your answer, your actual answer. I learned that back then. So when I was helping candidates with their messaging, that would be the first thing I would say. How do you really feel about this? Because really, that's how people feel. We're all humans. It's not like I'm a candidate and the constituents are the voters and we're like two different species and I have to fool them into voting for me. That's not how it's supposed to be. And these younger people who are now successful candidates winning primaries and are going to then be successful in their elections, I predict, they know that. They see the voters as being fellow human beings. Wow. Does that make sense? That's the direction we're going. That's how we're going to take back planet Earth from the darkness. That's what we're in the process of right now. But those forces that right now have control of the government in the United States, they're a cornered animal. And they're going to do all they can to survive. And it's going to get worse and worse. We see that happening. To me, this UFC fight is pretty horrible. But there are even worse stuff going on. We know that. But when I went for a walk today in a park, the birds were still chirping. A deer and her fawn, very small fawn, came running through our yard for the last 3 days in a row. The sun is still shining. The trees are green here in Minnesota. The lakes are beautiful, blue, reflecting the beautiful blue sky. That's all still here. You're still here with your health, your well-being, at whatever level that might be. Enjoy everything you can enjoy. We're all still here. We're working on it. And we're sticking together and coming together in a way that we never have before. Hundreds of thousands of people watching a tarp just because they knew what was going on behind that tarp. The erasure of Donald Trump. The whole world is protesting against these dark forces. That's what's happening now. You're a part of it. I'm a part of it. Let's stick together. And we will come out the other side of this. And we will do things like AOC is talking about. We will use the federal government for good things instead of just making rich people richer. We will make affordable health care and affordable education. We will help the people of America instead of ignore them, like the Republican Party has been doing for decades and decades now. And some Democrats have been doing that as well. We're all people. We're all the same. We want the same things. I thank you so much for being with me through this whole show and for being with me for all the times that you've been with me in the past. I will be here with you, and together we will get through this. Again, thank you for being here this week. I will speak to you again next week.
You've been listening to A Satellite View with Todd Mikkelson. Go to toddmikkelson.com for links and more information.